A mistake can cost you $1,000. A truly catastrophic mistake can cost you $1 billion. But for Louisa Dalton, the mistake that would end his career cost him an $8 billion merger and humiliate him in a room full of his peers wasn't a bad stock trade. It was a single 4-word insult. You're just uneducated. He delivered it with a sneer to the woman refilling his water. He thought she was just a waitress, a background character in his important life. He didn't know he was speaking to the only person in the entire country who could save his deal. And by the time she replied, her words shifting flawlessly between 5 different languages, the room was silent, and it was already too late. The Cypress Room wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage. Every night a performance took place. The clinking of heavy authentic silver against porcelain was the percussion. The low murmur of expensive conversations was the orchestra, and the spotlight was always on the clientele. The staff, including Ayana Kowalski, were the stagehands, essential, invisible, and exhausted. Ayana's feet throbbed. It was a deep, familiar ache that started in her heels and radiated up her calves, a dull drumbeat that marked the 8th hour of her double shift. She shifted her weight, the cheap, non-slip soles of her black shoes squeaking almost imperceptibly on the polished marble. Table 7 needs water, Ayana. Table 4 is asking for the check, and the Dalton party is due in 10. Mr. Henderson, the manager, murmured as he glided past, his own shoes making no sound at all. Yes, Mr. Henderson. Ayana grabbed a heavy water pitcher, the ice clinking, and moved toward table 7. Her reflection flashed in the dark wood paneling. A young woman in her mid-20s, hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun, her face pale with fatigue. The black apron, tied tight, felt like it was holding her together. This was not her life. This was a brutal intermission. Her real life was in dusty, forgotten books and the silent echo of dead languages. Her real life was a PhD dissertation on Proto-Indo-European linguistic migration, a topic that made most people's eyes glaze over. Her real life was a small, cramped apartment shared with her younger brother, Leo, whose mounting medical bills were the real reason she wore this apron. Leo had a rare autoimmune disorder, and the experimental treatments weren't fully covered by any insurance she could afford. So, she'd paused her doctorate, put her research on hold, and taken this job, a job that paid just enough in tips from the wealthy patrons of the Cypress Room to keep the specialists on Leo's case. She poured the water, her smile practiced and automatic. Will there be anything else for you this evening? The couple at table 7 didn't even look up. The man just waved a dismissive hand. Ayana retreated to the service station, her eyes scanning the room. She was a ghost here. A pair of hands. A voice that said, "Right away, sir." They saw the apron, the notepad, the coffee pot. They never saw her. They never saw the mind behind the smile, a mind that could currently curse their entitlement in ancient Sumerian, debate their political opinions in flawless German, or translate their menu into academic Latin. She pulled out her phone for a precious second, hiding it behind the stack of clean trays. Leo. Meds are done. Feeling a bit better. Don't work too hard. Ayana. Glad to hear it. Almost done here. Leo. Did you finish the translation for Professor Bayern? The one from the Vatican? Ayana. Almost. He said it's a linguistic curiosity. Just need to cross-reference the Aramaic inscription. I'll do it tonight. Leo. You're a superhero, Ayana. Ayana. Just pay the bills, little brother. See you soon. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, the brief exchange with her brother, a small, warm coal against the cold exhaustion of the shift. Professor Bayern, her old mentor, still sent her small translation jobs, ancient texts, obscure fragments. They paid little, but they kept her mind sharp, a lifeline to the world she'd had to leave behind. "Ayana, front and center," Henderson's voice cut through her thoughts. "The Dalton party. They're here." Ayana straightened her apron, smoothed the non-existent wrinkles, and put on her customer service smile. It felt like a mask. She walked toward the front, sensing a shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. The ambient noise quieted, then rose again, centered around the new arrivals. Louisa Dalton didn't just enter a room, he conquered it. He was a big man, not tall, but wide, radiating an aura of restless, aggressive energy. He wore a suit that was painfully expensive and deliberately loud, a deep navy with a bright, obnoxious pinstripe. His watch, a solid gold behemoth, caught the light and flashed it around the room like a warning beacon. He was new money, and he wanted everyone to know he'd paid cash for it. He was flanked by 3 people, a woman, Brenda, who was rail-thin and draped in diamonds that looked as cold and hard as her expression. 2 younger men, Kyle and Josh, in identical dark suits, holding phones and wearing identical, sycophantic smiles. They looked like high-paid yes-men. And then there was the 5th man. He hung back, separate from the group. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with grey hair and a quiet, unassuming tweed jacket. He looked more like a college professor than a businessman, and he observed the room with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He seemed almost embarrassed by Dalton's volume. "Henderson!" Dalton boomed, snapping his fingers. "My table. The best one. Now." "Of course, Mr. Dalton," Henderson said smoothly, gesturing. "Your usual booth by the window." "Good. And get us champagne. The real stuff. Don't try to pass off that cheap, sparkling wine on me." "Right away, sir. Ayana will be your server this evening." Henderson gave Ayana a look that said, "Be careful. This one is trouble." Ayana stepped forward, her smile fixed. "Good evening. My name is Ayana, and I'll be taking care of you." Dalton didn't even look at her. He was already sliding into the booth, shoving Brenda in beside him. He tossed the heavy, leather-bound menu onto the table. Water. Sparkling. Now. And the champagne. What are you waiting for? The quiet older man, however, paused. As Ayana turned to leave, his eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. There was no condescension in his gaze, only a weary, analytical curiosity. He gave her a slight, almost apologetic nod before sitting down. Ayana felt a chill. This wasn't going to be a normal table. This was going to be a battlefield. The next hour was a masterclass in humiliation. Louisa Dalton treated Ayana not as a person, but as a malfunctioning piece of equipment. She approached the table with the champagne, a bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than her brother's monthly medication. "Let me see that," Dalton snapped, snatching the bottle from her hands. He squinted at the label. Fine. Make sure you pour it right. I hate it when you people fill it to the top like it's a soda." "Of course, sir," Ayana said, her voice perfectly level. She opened the bottle with a practiced, subtle sigh of the cork, pouring a small amount for him to taste. He waved his hand. "Just pour." She served the table, her movements fluid and economical. The older man, who had been introduced simply as Robert, watched her. He hadn't ordered a drink, asking only for still water with no ice. "So, Robert," Dalton started, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "the Zurich deal is a lock, a total lock. These Swiss guys, they think they're so smart, but they haven't dealt with me." Kyle and Josh chuckled on cue. "They won't know what hit them, Louisa." Robert, the older man, merely steepled his fingers. "I would advise caution, Louisa. The Zurich merger is complicated. It's not just about numbers, it's about history. The entire company is built on a 15th century trade guild. Their bylaws are practically medieval. History, Dalton scoffed, spraying a bit of champagne. Who cares about history? Money talks, Robert. Everything else is just noise from guys who couldn't cut it in the real world. It's all about the P&L statement, the bottom line. The rest is just academic nonsense. Ayana, standing nearby to take their food order, felt a small muscle in her jaw tighten. Academic nonsense. The words felt like a personal slap. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" she asked. Dalton glared at her, as if annoyed by the interruption. "I'll have the steak, the big one, the king's cut, and make it medium rare. But not too rare, you get me? If I see any blood, I'm sending it back. And if it's overcooked, I'm sending it back. You got that, sweetheart? A perfect medium rare." "Understood," Ayana replied, her pen hovering. "And for you, sir?" she asked, turning to Robert. Robert gave her a small, kind smile. "I'll have the seared scallops, please, and a side salad with the vinaigrette." Brenda ordered a salad with no dressing, no croutons, no cheese. Basically just the lettuce. And the two yes men both ordered exactly what Dalton had ordered, right down to the temperature. "Good," Dalton said, slamming his menu shut and throwing it at the end of table. "Now go. And don't hover." Ayana retreated, her back rigid. At the service station, she leaned against the wall for a moment, closing her eyes. She could feel the adrenaline, the familiar fight or flight response that came with clients like Dalton. It was a burning, acidic feeling in her stomach. She hated this. She hated the feeling of being small, of having to swallow her pride to earn a tip that would pay for a single vial of medicine. "Everything all right with the Dalton party?" Henderson asked, seeing her expression. "Peachy," Ayana muttered. "He's just loud." "He's a whale, Ayana," Henderson said, his voice low. "He spends more in one night than most tables do in a month. Keep him happy. Whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Ayana repeated, the words tasting like ash. She delivered their appetizers. Dalton complained that his shrimp cocktail only had 5 shrimp. It was, as it always was, 5. She delivered their main courses. Dalton immediately cut into his steak, examined it under the candlelight, and grunted. "It's fine," he declared, as if this was the highest compliment he could bestow. The conversation at the table resumed, louder this time. "The real problem, Robert," Dalton was saying, "is this translator they're insisting on, some academic. A. Kowalski. They're paying this person a fortune, flying them out to Zurich, all to translate some mouldy old document from the 1400s. Can you believe the waste?" Ayana froze, her hand halfway to a water glass at the next table. A. Kowalski. It couldn't be. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Professor Bayern had sent her a translation, a linguistic curiosity, a 15th century Swiss-German trade document for an anonymous client. He had asked her to sign an NDA, and the fee he'd offered was staggering, enough to cover Leo's medical bills for an entire year. She had finished the preliminary translation just last night. "They're waiting on this Kowalski person's final report before they'll sign," Dalton continued, oblivious. "It's holding up my entire $8 billion deal, all for some dusty papers. I told them to just run it through a computer, an AI." Robert shook his head, looking into his water glass. "Louisa, I've told you. The document is written in a combination of Old High German, ecclesiastical Latin, and a specific Lombard dialect that hasn't been spoken in 600 years. An AI can't read it. The partners in Zurich believe it contains the original guild charter, the very clause that defines who can and cannot assume control of the company. It's not dusty paper. It's the entire foundation of the company. So, just get another translator, Dalton boomed. They've tried, Robert said, his voice flat. Apparently, this A. Kowalski is the only person on the planet with the specific cross-disciplinary expertise to make sense of it. Professor Byrne at the university recommended them as a once-in-a-generation talent. Talent, Dalton spat. I'll tell you what talent is. Talent is turning 1 million into 1 billion. That's talent. This is just reading. It's what you do when you can't do anything. It's for people who are, let's be honest, uneducated in the real world. Ayana felt the blood drain from her face. He was talking about her. This loud, obnoxious, arrogant man who was insulting her life's work was her anonymous client. The fate of his $8 billion deal was currently sitting on her laptop in her tiny apartment, next to a stack of Leo's medical charts. She felt a dizzying, terrifying sense of power. She had to get out of there. She had to breathe. She turned to walk back to the kitchen, but Dalton's voice barked at her. "Hey, you, waitress, where are you going? I'm not done with you." Ayana stopped, her back to him. She slowly turned around. "We want dessert," he said, snapping his fingers. "Bring the menus and be quick about it." Ayana just stared at him, for a second too long. The mask was cracking. "What's the matter with you?" Dalton sneered. "Did I hurt your feelings? Did you drop out of community college and now you're sensitive about education?" "It's okay, sweetheart. Some people are meant to do, and some people are meant to serve." Kyle and Josh snickered. Brenda examined her nails. Robert was watching Ayana with a sudden, intense, and deeply calculating expression. Ayana said nothing. She simply nodded, her jaw set so tight it ached, and went to get the dessert menus. The rest of the room had faded. The Cypress room was no longer a stage. It was a pressure cooker, and Ayana was at the center. She walked back to the table, her steps measured, her hands perfectly steady as she distributed the dessert menus. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her shake. She felt Robert's eyes on her. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was studying her. Dalton, buoyed by the laughter of his yes-men and his own self-importance, grabbed the menu. He was in his element, the bully with an audience. He scanned the items, his lips moving as he read. "Right," he said, trying to project an air of worldly sophistication. "I'll have the, let's see," he pointed. "The profit rollies." He'd said it with such confidence, such utter conviction, that his two sycophants, Kyle and Josh, nodded. "Good choice, Louisa." Ayana's training kicked in, a polite, automatic correction. "A wonderful choice, sir. The profiteroles." She pronounced it perfectly, the French syllables soft and correct. "And would you like the chocolate or the caramel sauce with that?" Dalton's face, which had been flush with alcohol and pride, darkened. He lowered the menu. The faint sound of the restaurant's light jazz music seemed to swell to fill the silence. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Ayana kept her smile in place, though it felt brittle. "I asked if you'd prefer the chocolate or the caramel sauce with your profiteroles, sir." "No," Dalton said, leaning forward. "Before that. I said profit rollies, and you corrected me." Brenda giggled, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "Oh, Louisa, she didn't mean anything." "Shut up, Brenda," Dalton snapped, not taking his eyes off Ayana. "I know what I said, and she corrected me, in front of my guests." Ayana's breath hitched. This was the moment, the precipice. She could apologize, grovel, say she misheard. She could save her tip, pay for the next copay. "I was simply clarifying your order, sir," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "It's my job to ensure you receive what you intended to order." "Clarifying," Dalton laughed, a short, barking sound. You think I don't know what I'm ordering? You think I, Louisa Dalton, don't know how to read a French menu? He was projecting his insecurity onto her, turning his own embarrassment into a weapon. I'm sure you do, sir, Ayana said. Don't patronize me, he roared. The entire restaurant went silent. A fork clattered against a plate at a nearby table, and it sounded like a gunshot. Mr. Henderson, across the room, froze and began moving toward them. You walk in here, Dalton said, jabbing a thick finger in her direction, with your little notepad and your empty smile, and you think you can look down on me. You think you're smarter than me. Ayana said nothing. She just stood there, a statue in a black apron. Look at me when I'm talking to you, he yelled. Ayana met his gaze. Her eyes were clear, and to his fury, they held no fear. They held only a vast, cold exhaustion. Her silence was his final provocation. It was the one thing he couldn't bully. That's the problem with your kind, he spat, his voice dripping with contempt as he threw the menu down. You think reading a few words on a fancy menu makes you an intellectual. You're just a girl, a servant. You're here because you couldn't hack it in the real world. You're here because you have no ambition, no drive, and no education. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical, cruel whisper that carried across the silent room. Let me be clear, so your simple mind can understand it. You're just a waitress. You are, at the end of the day, uneducated. The word hung in the air. Uneducated. It was the insult that broke the dam. It wasn't just about her. It was about Leo, studying in his bed, fighting a disease with a textbook in his lap. It was about her mentor, Professor Byrne, who saw genius in her. It was about the centuries of knowledge she had painstakingly acquired, the late nights spent unraveling languages that had been silent for millennia. All of it, all of her life's work, reduced to nothing by a man who couldn't even pronounce his dessert. Mr. Henderson arrived at the table. Mr. Dalton, is there a problem with the service? Hell yes, there's a problem, Dalton shouted. This girl is insulting me. I want her fired. Now, get her out of my sight. Henderson looked at Ayana, his face a mask of professional panic. Ayana, apologize to Mr. Dalton. This was it. Apologize or lose the job that was keeping her brother alive. Ayana looked at Henderson. She looked at the terrified faces of Kyle and Josh. She looked at Brenda, who was staring at her diamonds. She looked at Robert Beaumont, who was watching her with an unreadable, hawk-like intensity. And then she looked at Louisa Dalton, who was smiling, triumphant, waiting for her to break. Ayana took a slow, deep breath. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered and fell away. The practiced, subservient smile vanished. Her posture, which had been a trained posture of service, straightened. She seemed to grow taller. She turned her head slightly, but she didn't address Dalton. She addressed the man who had been silent all night. She looked directly at Robert Beaumont, and her first words were in flawless, aristocratic French. Her voice was no longer the flat, pleasant tone of a waitress. It was crisp, academic, and sharp as glass. Mr. Beaumont, she said in perfect French, I ask you to excuse the interruption of your meal. It is clear your colleague confuses arrogance with intelligence. The entire table froze. Dalton, who had been sneering, looked confused. What? What did she say? Robert Beaumont's eyebrows shot up. He replied to her, also in flawless French. It is not you who should be apologizing, miss. Ayana gave him a curt nod, then turned her full attention to Dalton. The bully looked like a fish out of water, his mouth opening and closing. He sputtered, I don't know what "What game you're playing, sweetheart, but I want you." She cut him off. Her second language was German. Her tone shifted, becoming guttural, assertive, and precise. It was the language of engineering, of philosophy, and of the Zurich merger. "Mr. Dalton," she said, the German word sounding sharp and precise, "your assumption that education only happens in a boardroom is not just false. It is dangerous." Dalton's face went from confused to pale. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. He understood he was no longer in control. "You speak all night of the Zurich merger agreement," she continued in German. "An agreement that is completely misunderstood by a man of your caliber. You think it an obstacle. It is, in fact, a foundation." Kyle and Josh were staring, their faces blank with shock. Brenda had put her hand over her mouth. "What is this?" Dalton stammered, looking at Robert. "Is this a joke?" "Robert, what is she doing?" Robert Beaumont said nothing. He was watching Ayana with a look of dawning, thunderstruck realization. Ayana wasn't finished. She took a step closer, and her third language filled the air. Mandarin, tonal, fluid, and complex, the language of the new global economy. "You think money is everything," she said, her voice cutting through the silence as she spoke the complex language. "But you have no vision. A person of real vision would understand that serving others does not imply a lack of intellect." A table of diners in the corner, who had been watching, gasped. One of them whispered, "My God, her accent is perfect." Dalton was shrinking. The large, boisterous man was visibly deflating in his booth, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. "Stop it," he whispered. I demand you stop." "Demand?" Ayana replied, switching to her fourth language, Spanish. The tone was warm and passionate, but in her mouth it was a whip. "You demand, but you offer nothing. Not respect, not dignity." She gestured to the other staff, watching from the kitchen doorway. "You see us as nothing," she continued in Spanish. "But without us, your world stops. Who brings you your food? Who cleans your mess? Dignity is not bought with money, sir. It is earned." The room was so quiet, the only sound was the hum of the wine fridge. Mr. Henderson looked like he was going to faint. Ayana saved her final language for the end. It was the mic drop, the language of law, of medicine, of academia, the root of all his fancy menu words. She looked Louisa Dalton square in the eyes. Her voice was cold, clear, and rang with the authority of centuries as she spoke in Latin. "Deeds, not words," she said. She let the phrase hang in the air. She switched back to German, for Robert's benefit. "You called me uneducated." Then, finally, she returned to English, so every single person in that room could understand the execution. "You, Mr. Dalton," she said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with a white-hot, righteous anger. "Dare to use a word like uneducated to me? Me?" She laughed, but it was a cold, sharp sound. "I have spent the last 10 years of my life studying the very origins of the words you can't even be bothered to pronounce. While you were in boardrooms learning how to bully people, I was translating texts that you don't even know exist. I am Ayana Kowalski." Robert Beaumont's head snapped up. His eyes widened. He whispered one word, "Kowalski." Ayana heard him, but she wasn't done with Dalton. "The uneducated waitress serving you tonight? I am the PhD candidate who wrote the paper on the Lombardic dialects. I am the linguist who translated the Vatican's Aramaic fragment last year. And yes, Mr. Dalton, I am A. Kowalski, the one holding up your $8 billion deal, the one whose academic nonsense you've been insulting for the last hour." The silence in the room was absolute. It was profound. Louisa Dalton's face was no longer pale. It was a mottled, terrifying shade of grey. He looked at Ayana. He looked at Robert. He looked at the other diners who were all staring at him with open, undisguised contempt. He had not just insulted his waitress, he had insulted his entire future. Robert Beaumont was the first to move. He slowly, deliberately, placed his napkin on the table. He didn't look at Dalton. He looked only at Ayana, as if she were the only other person in the room. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated awe. "Ayana Kowalski," he said, testing the name. "Professor Bayern's protégé, the once-in-a-generation talent." Ayana inclined her head. "Professor Bayern is my mentor, yes." "My God," Robert whispered. He fumbled in his tweed jacket and pulled out a simple, worn leather briefcase. He clicked it open and pulled out a single, laminated photograph of a document. It was a picture of ancient, faded parchment covered in elaborate, spidery script. "This," he said, holding it up, "is the document. The Zurich Guild Charter. The one my partners believe contains the spare clausel, the locking clause. My foundation, we are the anonymous client who hired Professor Bayern to find a translator." "I know," Ayana said simply. "I finished the preliminary translation last night." Dalton made a small, strangled noise in his throat. Robert, listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. A crazy coincidence." "A coincidence?" Robert said, his voice quiet, but carrying the sudden, unmistakable ring of authority. "I don't think so. I think this is what you'd call providence, or perhaps karma." He turned to Ayana, his eyes sharp. "What did you find? In the text?" Ayana paused. She looked at Dalton, then at Robert. "Mr. Beaumont, I signed a non-disclosure agreement with Professor Bayern." "I am Robert Beaumont," he said, pulling a card from his wallet. "Chairman of the Beaumont Trust. We are the ones funding the merger, Louisa's partners. I am your client. The NDA is with me. So please, Miss Kowalski, what does it say?" Ayana's mind raced. The job, the tip, her brother. None of it mattered now, only the truth. "The spare clausel is real," she said. "It's in a footnote, written in a 15th century blend of Latin and Lombardic. It states that control of the guild, and thus the company, cannot be passed to any new partner. And I quote, who demonstrates a character of boorish ignorance or willful disrespect for learned things. It was designed to keep uneducated, wealthy merchants from buying their way into the guild." She locked eyes with Dalton. "The clause essentially states that the company cannot be acquired by anyone who, well, by anyone like you." Dalton shot to his feet. The chair screeched backward. "That's a lie! You're making that up! You're doing this to get back at me!" "Am I?" Ayana said, her voice like ice. "The final line, Mr. Beaumont, translates to, 'This is our testament.' The Zurich partners, they aren't just being difficult. They're legally bound by this document. They cannot sell to Mr. Dalton. It would violate their own charter." Robert Beaumont stared at her. Then slowly, a small, grim smile touched his lips. He looked at Dalton, who was standing there, vibrating with rage and panic. "All this time, Louisa," Robert said, his voice laced with a sudden, cold anger. "For 6 months you told me the hold-up was Swiss stubbornness. You told me it was a formality. You told me your team had it handled." "It is handled," Dalton roared. "She's lying. Robert, you're not going to take the word of a waitress over mine, are you?" Robert looked at Dalton. His gaze was flat and final. "She is not a waitress, Louisa. She is the expert, the one you insulted, the one you called uneducated." He gestured to Ayana. "This woman just quoted, from memory, a 600-year-old legal document, in 3 different languages, a document that you, the head of this entire $8 billion acquisition, dismissed as academic nonsense. He shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. I was on the fence about you, Louisa. Your methods are brutish. Your personality is appalling. But your numbers were good. I was willing to overlook your character for the sake of the deal. He paused, then delivered the final blow. But it seems the founders of the Zurich Guild, 600 years ago, had more foresight than I did. They specifically wrote a rule to protect their company from men like you. And you just proved their case. Robert, no, Dalton pleaded. His voice was no longer booming. It was a desperate, thin whine. Robert, we can fix this. We can hire her. Pay her whatever she wants. He turned to Ayana, his eyes wild with terror. I'll pay you $1 million. Just tell him you were wrong. Tell him you misread it. Ayana looked at the man who, 10 minutes ago, had tried to have her fired over the pronunciation of a dessert. $1 million. It would solve every problem. It would give Leo the best care in the world. She looked at Robert Beaumont, a man who, though wealthy, understood the value of knowledge. Mr. Dalton, Ayana said, her voice clear and carrying, my translation is not for sale, and neither am I. She turned back to Mr. Beaumont. The report is on my laptop. I can have the full annotated version with all linguistic cross-references sent to you and Professor Byron within the hour. Robert Beaumont nodded slowly. That, he said, is exactly what I had hoped to hear. The collapse of Louisa Dalton was swift and total. It wasn't loud. It was a silent, agonizing implosion. He sank back into his chair, the color gone from his face, leaving a waxy, grey pallor. He looked at his 2 yes-men, Kyle and Josh, who were frantically staring at their phones, pretending to be anywhere else. He looked at Brenda, who was quietly sliding her diamond-ringed hand off the table, as if to physically distance herself from his failure. Robert, please. Dalton tried one last time, his voice a hoarse croak. Think of the money. The shareholders. We can fight this. We can sue. Sue whom, Louisa? Robert asked, his voice genuinely curious. The 15th century guild founders? Based on what? The fact that they didn't want their company run by an arrogant fool? I suspect that clause will hold up in court. Especially, he added, with a pointed look at Ayana, when we have the world's foremost expert on the subject to testify. He turned to Ayana, and his entire demeanor softened. The cold businessman was gone, replaced by the intrigued academic he'd resembled at the start. Miss Kowalski, Ayana, he said, the Beaumont Trust. We don't just finance mergers. Our primary work is in historical preservation and linguistic research. Professor Byron is on our board. We have been searching for an analyst with your exact, and I must say, impossibly rare, skill set for years. We have a research center in Zurich and another in Rome. We've been trying to translate a library of 14th century Mediterranean trade ledgers. It's a linguistic curiosity that no one has been able to crack. He smiled. It seems my business trip has just become a recruitment mission. Mr. Henderson, who had been standing by the service station, looking as if he'd been struck by lightning, finally crept forward. Mr. Beaumont? Is everything all right? Robert Beaumont looked at Henderson, then at Ayana. Mr. Henderson, he said, pulling out a black American Express card. There is a problem, and that is that Miss Kowalski is dramatically, laughably overqualified for her current position. He handed the card to Henderson. I will be covering this party's disastrous meal. I am also adding a $50,000 tip. This is not for Mr. Dalton's service. This is a donation to your restaurant's employee fund, on the condition that you accept Miss Kowalski's immediate resignation." Henderson's jaw dropped. Ayanna looked at Mr. Henderson, the man who had been her boss for 2 grueling years. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice soft now, "thank you for the job. It helped me when I needed it." She reached behind her back and, with a single fluid motion, untied her black apron. The weight, the exhaustion, the humiliation of the last 2 years seemed to fall away with it. She folded it neatly and placed it on the service tray Henderson was holding. "But I'm afraid," she said, "that I quit." "Ayanna," Henderson breathed, looking at the black card in his hand. "Good. Good for you." "Now," Robert said, standing up and buttoning his tweed jacket. "Miss Kowalski, I believe we have a job offer to discuss. My car is outside. We can talk on the way to my hotel, and you can email me that report. We need to alert the Zurich board immediately that the Dalton acquisition is, officially, dead." He offered her his arm. Ayanna looked at Louisa Dalton one last time. He was a broken man, staring at the half-eaten, medium-rare steak he had declared fine. He was surrounded by the ruins of his own arrogance. Ayanna did not say another word to him. She did not look back. She took Robert Beaumont's arm, and, holding her head high, she walked out of the Cypress Room. As she passed the entrance, the other diners who had witnessed the entire drama in stunned silence did something extraordinary. A table in the corner began to clap. Not loudly, but with a firm, respectful applause. Then another table joined, and another. As Ayanna Kowalski walked out the front door, leaving her old life behind, the last thing she heard was the sound of the entire restaurant applauding her. The heavy glass door of the Cypress Room closed behind them, cutting off the sudden, surreal sound of applause. The cool November air was a shock, sharp and clean, and for a moment Ayanna felt dizzy, as if she had just surfaced from underwater. The adrenaline that had turned her veins to ice inside the restaurant was now making her hands tremble. She was, she realized with a jolt, still a woman in a waitress uniform, standing on a curb next to one of the wealthiest men in the country. A black, impeccably clean sedan pulled up to the curb. It made almost no sound. A driver in a simple dark suit emerged and opened the rear door, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. "After you," Robert said, his voice as calm as if they were leaving a board meeting, not a battlefield. Ayanna hesitated. She looked at the plush, carpeted floor of the car, then down at her own cheap, non-slip shoes. She slid in, the leather of the seat impossibly soft. The interior was silent, smelling not of new car plastic, but of old paper, wool, and the faint, sweet trace of pipe tobacco. It was the smell of her professor's office. It was the smell of a world she thought she had lost. Robert settled in beside her, and the car pulled smoothly into the river of city traffic. The restaurant, with its bright lights and drama, vanished behind them. For a long minute, there was only the sound of the tires on the pavement. Ayanna stared at her hands, which were clutched tightly in her lap, the knuckles white. She could still feel the phantom weight of the heavy water pitcher, the ache in her feet. "My apologies for that entire spectacle," Robert said, breaking the silence. He was rubbing his temples, looking out the window. "Louisa Dalton is a blunt instrument, a brutish, necessary evil of my world. Or at least," he sighed, turning to her, "I thought he was. You proved me wrong tonight." You were going to let him acquire that company," Ayanna said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, dazed statement. I was, Robert admitted, his gaze unflinching. I am a pragmatist, Ayana, or I try to be, but I am also a scholar. My family's money came from publishing, generations ago. The Beaumont Trust is my life's work. We don't just finance mergers, we preserve the very things men like Dalton try to bulldoze. We preserve history, we preserve the words. He paused, a small, wry smile touching his lips. I've been looking for a successor. Someone to run the Trust's European research division. Someone with the academic rigor and the spine to protect that history. It's not a job you can post on a careers website. You can't put "must be willing to stand up to billionaires" in the job description. He turned fully in his seat, his eyes kind, but intensely serious. I've been reading A. Kowalski's papers for 2 years, Ayana. I read your dissertation on the Lombardic migration. I read your rebuttal to the German analysis of the Codex Argentius. I frankly thought you were a 70-year-old man named Albert, probably tucked away at Oxford. Ayana stared at him, her throat tight. You've read my work. Read it? My dear, I've argued with it in the margins. You are the only person who has made a compelling argument for the Aramaic influence on early trade routes. When you started speaking French tonight, I thought, what a remarkable coincidence. When you switched to German, I knew exactly who you were. I just couldn't understand what on earth you were doing serving Louisa Dalton a steak. The adrenaline was fading, and the dam of exhaustion and stress that held her together was beginning to crack. The one word Dalton had used, uneducated, echoed in her head, now a hollow, bitter irony. My brother, she said, the words coming out at a rush, a confession. Leo, he's sick, a rare autoimmune disorder. The medical bills, the experimental treatments, the job, this job, it was the only one that paid enough in cash tips to keep him on the program. My doctorate. I had to put it all on hold. Robert listened, his expression never changing, his attention absolute. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. I know, he said gently. Professor Bayern mentioned your difficult personal situation. He's a terrible liar, you know. He's been trying to get me to hire you for a year, but you'd stopped answering his emails. He arranged this anonymous translation as a last-ditch effort. Robert reached into the tweed jacket he still wore. The fee he offered you, the one that was so staggering. That wasn't a fee, Ayana. That was the first-year salary for the analyst position in Zurich. We were going to offer you the job as soon as the translation was confirmed. Ayana's head spun. This entire night, this entire agonizing, humiliating night. It was all a missed connection. You just expedited the interview process, Robert said, his smile returning. Consider tonight a rather dramatic final round. He held out his hand. It was a scholar's hand, with ink stains on the cuticle of one finger, but it was also the hand of a man who commanded billions. Ayana Kowalski, I would like to offer you the position of Director of Linguistic Research for the Beaumont Trust, based in our Zurich office. You will have a full research staff, a linguistic curiosity of your own to solve, a library of 14th century Mediterranean trade ledgers nobody can crack, and full access to the Vatican archives. He leaned in, and his voice dropped, losing all business pretense. And you will have a salary and a benefits package that will ensure your brother, Leo, receives the best medical care on earth. We can have him transferred to the specialist clinic in Geneva by the end of the week. Our doctors will handle everything. That was the moment the dam broke. Ayana looked at his outstretched hand, and all the fight, all the anger, all the years of terror and exhaustion dissolved. She pressed her fingertips to her mouth as a single, hot tear, the first she had allowed herself to cry in months, rolled down her cheek. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a gasp of pure, unadulterated relief. The single crushing weight that had defined her entire existence was gone. She wiped the tear away, her hand no longer shaking. She took a deep, steadying breath, the woman from the restaurant now fully gone, replaced by the scholar. She took his hand and shook it. Her grip was firm. "I accept, Mr. Beaumont." "Robert," he corrected her, his eyes warm. "Welcome to the trust." As the car turned onto the main bridge, the city skyline glittering like a promise, Ayana pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the text message icon, but she hit call instead. It rang twice. "Ayana?" Leo's voice was sleepy, but laced with worry. "You're off early? Are you okay? Did the rich guy tip well?" She laughed, a real, full laugh that felt strange in her own chest. "Something like that, Leo. I have a question for you." "Yeah? What's up? How do you feel about Switzerland?" There was a confused silence. "What? Like the chocolate?" "No, little brother," she said, looking out the window as the car sped toward her new life. "Like the hospitals. Like the mountains. Pack your bags." Back at the Cypress Room, the applause had long since died. The silence that replaced it was heavy and accusatory. Every table in the dining room was staring at the man in the rumpled pinstripe suit who was still sitting, stunned, at his ruined meal. Mr. Henderson walked over, his professional mask gone. His face was cold. He didn't say a word. He simply placed the black leather bill folder on the table in front of Louisa Dalton. Dalton opened it, his hands clumsy. He stared at the charges, the champagne, the multiple King's Cut steaks. Then he saw the last line, gratuity, $50,000. He let out a bark of a laugh. He's joking. This is a joke. Mr. Beaumont does not joke, sir, Henderson said, his voice flat. The bill is paid. That is your copy. He tapped the receipt. He was very clear. That was not a tip for the service. That was a donation, given on the specific condition that I accept Miss Kowalski's resignation. He paid, sir, to make sure she never had to serve you, or anyone like you, ever again. The humiliation hit Dalton harder than any financial loss. He had been so thoroughly, so completely, so elegantly dismissed. He fumbled for his own wallet, a pathetic reflexive gesture, but he was already a ghost. He was ruined. 6 months later, sunlight filtered through 16th century stained glass, illuminating a fine layer of dust on an ancient, vellum-bound ledger. Ayana Kowalski gently turned the page, the smell of old paper and ink rising to meet her. Her office in Zurich was quiet, overlooking a cobblestone square. She thought, for a fleeting moment, of the ache that used to live in her feet. She remembered the smell of the kitchen, of stale grease and burnt coffee. It felt like another lifetime, like a story she had read about someone else. On her tablet, a small headline in a financial paper caught her eye. Dalton Enterprises liquidation finalized. Founder faces federal investigation. She took a sip of her coffee and closed the tab. A framed picture on her desk caught the light. It was Leo, his face flush with cold air and sunlight, grinning from ear to ear on a ski slope just outside Geneva. He looked healthy. He looked alive. Ayana turned back to the ledger, to the 600-year-old puzzle waiting for her. She had not only saved her brother, she had saved herself. She had learned that night that her mind, her passion, her education was not academic nonsense. It was not a liability to be hidden, nor a curiosity to be belittled. It was her value. It was the shield that had protected her, the key that had unlocked her future, and the weapon that, in one quiet night, had changed her entire world. The story of Ayanna Kowalski and Louisa Dalton is a powerful, real-life reminder that a person's worth is never defined by their uniform, their job title, or the assumptions of arrogant people. Louisa Dalton saw a waitress. He saw someone uneducated. What he failed to see was the expert, the scholar, and the one person who held the key to his entire future. He learned the hard way that true intelligence isn't about how much money you can make. It's about how much respect you show to the people around you. Ayanna didn't just win an argument. She reclaimed her power and her future, all by using the very academic nonsense he despised. What do you think of Ayanna's comeback? Was Dalton's fate justified, or was it too harsh? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-life stories of karma, justice, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.